What are your night shift horror stories? This didn't become a horror story until recently, but as a teen, I used to close down the gas station, a truck stop I worked at, alone. My boss used to pop up out of the shadows as I was closing down the till with the backup lights on. He'd be super calm and act like it wasn't creepy at 11 p.m. when he should be home with his family. He was even at my high school graduation, he and his wife's numbers still in my phone. Anyhow, he is currently on trial for murdering a prostitute via stabbing her to death, back in '94. Cold case potentially solved via DNA and modern science. Oh man, I hate recalling this story. I work night shift at a rehab facility. We have a protected gate with a camera looking down from above, and one of those doorbell cameras. In the office, the camera monitor is on one wall and the doorbell monitor is on another. I was doing some paperwork and see this guy walk past, stop for a few seconds, then slowly turned around, walked back and stared up at the camera. And he kept staring. The facility is in a rough neighborhood, so I'm fairly used to folks hanging out around the gate and usually ignore it. But the way he was staring was off-putting. Like, his eyes and expression were hollow and dead, almost as if he were in deep thought about something horrible. I was pretty sure he was zonked on synthetics. I used the intercom to see if he was okay, but he just kept staring directly at the camera. We have a rule: if it's not hurt, or trying to come through the fence, just let it be. No sense in engaging needlessly with somebody potentially hostile or fucking with the locals. Y'all, he stood there and stared at that camera for 2 hours. That same dead-eyed expression staring right at me. I did a round and came back to find him gone, which only creeped me out more. Used to work nights at a Home Depot. There was one time where for a week or so our store stayed open 24 hours. For the most part this wasn't really a problem. Typically nobody comes shopping for home improvement items at 2 in the morning, except that one couple that came looking for marble countertops at 1:30 in the morning, and the woman was wearing a nice dress. I guess there was also that one young lady who came looking for a toilet paper roll holder a little after midnight. I had just gotten off my first break, and she was wearing jorts and one of those white with black belt stereotypical karate outfits. She was oddly specific about which roll holder to get, too. But the real story lies within the insulation. It was nearing 3 in the morning and me and another guy were stocking insulation, as well as fixing the bays and some such maintenance. A bunch of big R30s had fallen in their bay, and while I was sorting through them a fucking hand came out of the mess and grabbed my arm. I lost my mind enough for not only the guy I was working with to freak out, but also for my boss, who was across the store, to come check out the commotion. Turns out a homeless drunkard had come into the store at some point, and I can only assume before the night crew showed up, and had made a nest in the insulation, where he fell asleep. The dude was in bad shape, too. Like, far gone into whatever inebriation, that we had to call the police to remove him. I was always a little more cautious around the insulation after for at least the time the store stayed open 24 hours. Not mine, but I used to work at a small hotel, and the manager there told me a terrifying night shift story. It was about midnight, when she got a call at the front desk from a man. He said that he's with his 8-year-old daughter, who dances competitively, and needed advice on what she should wear. She gave him some basic fashion advice. He asked my manager, "What about fishnet leggings? Do you think those are too sexy?" Then proceeds to talk in graphic detail about how he thinks his own daughter has been trying to seduce him for weeks, and how he's starting to enjoy seeing her dance in these cute outfits. Meanwhile, my manager is looking through a computer system trying to figure out who this man is so she can call the cops. However, the room he was reportedly in was empty. The man ends up hanging the phone up before she could find out where he was truly calling from. A couple months later, at around 11 p.m., my manager answers the desk phone. A familiar voice asked her if she could help him pick out an outfit for his daughter's next dance recital. She asked him, "Let me guess, you want to know if she should wear fishnet leggings?" The man immediately hangs up the phone. Many years ago, I worked at a regional station in the middle of fucking nowhere, Australia. I was the overnight operator, keep the overnight playlist running, set up for the morning, do all the manual checks for the next day, and jump on the desk if anything funky happens. I spent a lot of time sitting in what was essentially a tin shed in the middle of a paddock, with my dog, shoes off, listening to 50s and 60s music and doing crossword puzzles. Except one night, when the roost shooters came through. They spooked the kangaroos in the paddock, and one of them jumped headfirst through our office window. So there's me barefoot and half asleep, when this 6 tall kangaroo smashes through the glass window. Blood and glass everywhere. My dog starts chasing the kangaroo, I'm chasing my dog. And the kangaroo bounds around the office, knocking shit off desks in the dark, bleeding everywhere. I ran and opened the studio bay doors, and my dog chased it outside. Where, I'm assuming, the poor thing, the kangaroo, was shot. Then I had to call my boss. Edit, Bandit, the dog, was fine. She lived a long and healthy life, occasionally being bullied by our pet cockatiel. Warning, medical gross stuff incoming. I worked in an emergency room. The worst night that comes to mind involves a patient that was bitten by a baby timber rattlesnake. He was bleeding out of every single orifice by the time he got to us. More blood than I'd ever seen before outside of a motorcycle vs 75 miles per hour, headfirst to asphalt. I don't remember how many doses of crofab we gave him, but it was the hospital's entire supply. But trying to get him stabilized, arranging the helicopter transport to a bigger and better equipped facility, all the blood, those weren't the worst parts. The worst part was when the patient lost control of his bowels. I will never, ever, forget that smell. I spent the entire time standing by the door with a battery-powered fan and a handful of gauze pads saturated with cinnamon oil trying to reduce some of the smell. The doctor occasionally stuck her head out just so I could waft the cinnamon oil in her face. Yes, by some miracle, the patient did end up surviving, and as far as I know he made a full recovery. But the blood, the smell, and just the shock of it all. Yeah, never underestimate a baby timber rattlesnake. Many years ago, I briefly had a job that started at 3:30 a.m. The job itself was very boring, but the commute was wild. The world is at its weirdest in the very early morning. Road hazards haven't been called in yet, so one day I pulled off the freeway and discovered that the off-ramp was completely flooded, deep enough that I have no idea how my car didn't stall. But the most interesting discovery was that if law enforcement has to raid a home, they do it around 3 or 4 in the morning because that's the best chance of everyone being peacefully asleep. One day I was nearly to work when I noticed something off ahead of me. I slowed down and came up to a massive police blockade, squad cars everywhere and absolutely crawling with heavily armed officers, but all in absolute silence. They silently waved me down a side street. Just a creepy, unsettling experience. I was closing supervisor at a grocery store, and someone managed to shit between the bathroom and the exit doors at 8:59, we close at 9 o'clock. You'd think, oh, there's literal shit on the floor, surely people will walk around it. No, instead they continue to plow through it, so now there's shit on multiple grocery carts. The exit is scattered with feces. There's shit on people's shoes undoubtedly. And there's shit in the parking lot. Luckily for me, my less squeamish supervisor working with me that closing night volunteered to mop up the exit and bathroom, which to our surprise, had also been shit on. For the record, human shit makes me immediately gag and vomit when I get a whiff of it, so I ended up puking in the trash next to the shit exit. Working late at an ice rink. I'm a Zamboni driver. It's a local rink with 2 sheets of ice. I get a phone call from my coworker. He's calling me on the Zamboni. It's loud, but I can clearly hear him yelling, "There is blood, a lot of blood. Oh God." And he hangs up. So I start running. I tear into his arena and the ice is covered in blood. Like, seriously, so much. Then I realized how stupid we were. Well, him more than me. When he started resurfacing the ice, a hydraulic line to his board brush blew and started spewing out red hydraulic fluid. Looked like crimson blood on the ice. I ran onto the ice and told him to pull off. He was frazzled and driving in circles. Since he lost hydrologic pressure, he couldn't pull his conditioner up when trying to get off the ice. Ruined the blade on the Zamboni, but there wasn't much else he could do. Can't leave it on the ice. I told him it was hydraulic fluid, not blood. But he should check for dead bodies around the rink anyway. Best part. After he got off the ice, with fear in his eyes and adrenaline pumping, "Hey, can you call our boss and tell him? No, it's 2 in the morning. It broke on you. You have to call him." That's how it works. I was working the Christmas Eve night shift in my local emergency department. The clock struck 4 a.m. on Christmas morning and the emergency buzzer sounded. A 74-year-old male patient had gone into a sudden cardiac arrest. The buzzer wasn't working properly, so we couldn't locate where exactly in the department it was coming from. Once we finally figured it out, we got in there and I took over chest compressions. A team of anesthetists, nurses, doctors, and 20 minutes later, we managed to get him back for just long enough for his family to come and say goodbye to him. What a shitty Christmas. I work at a hotel in the middle of city and I was on the overnight front desk shift when me and my valet at the time realized there was a man in one of the guest rooms that was prior occupied. We called the police and found that the guest upstairs hog-tied him. So he was escorted out, nothing too crazy. Stuff like that happens all the time in a hotel like this. But we had the 3 lowest floors of the hotel shut down due to low occupancy during COVID-19. We soon discovered he was caught in the guest's room after trying to open every door from the floor up, seeing if it was unlocked or propped open slightly. He was staying in one of our vacant rooms on the low floor unknown to us for a week, stealing food from the minibar and banquet halls. We watched him on the security cameras on the lower floors walking around the halls every night, but naked and videoing himself. Night shift nurse picked up the phone about 2 a.m. Don't panic, but recognized it as one of the C-suite's voices. I was immediately worried. There's an electrical issue in the something another closet. There's a chance it may explode. You need to evacuate all patients from the area. Just me and one other nurse with 5 moms, their 5 babies, and however many visitors. We quickly jumped into our own little, panic-driven, task force. We had packed up enough diapers, wipes, formula, water, snacks, and blankets to be evacuated for a week, lol. Happy to report it didn't explode and all was back to normal by 7 a.m. day shift. There's plenty of horror stories from creepy things happening, or just not having enough staff during bad deliveries. But this one has always stood out in my memory. As a former Walmart graveyard worker, I can attest to the absolute weirdest people coming out at night. I'm not sure what it is about 12 to 3 a.m., but that's definitely the sweet spot. The weirdest thing that would happen at mine was that periodically, a man, or should I say a typical Walmart brand tweaker, would come in, tall white bald weird dirty sweatsuit type pants, a shirt, and he wore a backpack. So first time you saw him you were thinking of course he's gonna steal shit. And he did, a lot actually. But that's because he was the fastest tweaker alive. The man had to have mapped the store out, because he was in and out of departments like he had an underground route. He'd stroll right in, someone would see him and walkie his location, he'd snatch whatever and simply vanish from hardware to suddenly appear in HBA. Then we'd run after him and he was gone again. It was honestly kind of creepy knowing that he could be around somewhere close, because he was always really messed up on meth or something. You wouldn't know he left until you heard a fire exit go off. That's how we knew he was gone. It wasn't a one-time thing, it happened at least once a month. Same guy, same operation. Sometimes I miss that job, just for the absolute crazy stories like that. I was doing a night shift at a bodega in Brooklyn, and this homeless lady comes running in yelling and crying. She went to the beer section and broke the window with something. I went to go check it out, and she was hysterically crying, using a shard of glass to cut her wrist open. Not just clean cuts, but like gouging it open. Blood all over her shirt. No clue how she broke the window. There was a hospital literally a block and a half down, and the moment I saw her with blood streaming down her wrist, I just sort of manhandled her over my shoulder and ran to the hospital with her on me. She was crying and screaming and hitting me with her other arm. These guys who hang out on the block saw me run down the block with a tiny, screaming, bleeding woman over my shoulder, and they jolted after me thinking I was kidnapping her. They caught up to me and tackled me and she fell to the ground, and they threw me against a wall and kept asking me what the fuck I was doing, and I said I was taking her to the hospital. And they all quickly realized what was going on and got her up and to the hospital. The whole ordeal happened in like the span of maybe 150 to 200 seconds. I had a concussion from when they knocked me to the floor. She survived apparently, no clue besides that. I think I may have told this story somewhere else, but I can't remember. I worked night shift at a small hotel in a small town in Utah. Every so often, some guy would call us and ask questions about booking a room, but would never actually go through with it. One night, he calls in again and I'm entertaining his questions. He asks about rooms and rates, things to do around town, and where we are located. Then he starts asking personal questions like where I'm from, if I'm Mormon, and if I was alone. He then asked if I was standing up, which freaked me out because I was, and I was sure he was somehow watching me. Looking back, it would make sense that I was standing behind the desk on the phone, but my sleep-deprived brain didn't make that connection until later. I told him to stop calling and hung up the phone, then I went to the back room and cried. I called my then boyfriend, now husband, and he talked to me while I calmed down. When I think about it now, it was probably some guy high or drunk and thought it would be funny to mess with someone. It was so freaky, especially since I was alone, tired, and couldn't think straight. I worked third shift as RN on orthopedic floor. Never failed, every full moon crazy things happen. One night we each had 11 patients and 3 nurses, no CNA. It started with the man, who was on oxygen, constantly trying to smoke in his room despite hearing the dangers and warnings. Before I could contact shift manager, I hear a noise I can't describe. One of my co-workers' patients with a rectal tube in, had slid out of his special air mattress onto the floor with the rectal tube out. As she and I are trying to get him back in bed, the phone is ringing. Get him in bed with help of strong security guards help. Answer the phone and one of my patients kept calling 911. She was receiving too much pain medication. When I walked in to check on her, she had climbed, post-op 2 knee replacements, over the side rail and was all tangled up. That wasn't even the whole shift. Gunshot victim with angry family around past visiting hours, literally got yanked by one patient's family member into a room and shoved towards a guy who they say is going to vomit. Of course, before I could grab a bucket, it went all over me. Many mornings I went home with vomit, urine had a full urinal thrown at me or worse somewhere on my person. Always disrobed on mud porch, and immediately showered every morning. Between all of those calamities there were strokes, codes, and DR patients who pass away even on orthopedic. There is a lot entailed in preparing the deceased patient for family to say final goodbyes, then much more after the family's departure. Not sure why this particular memory is so prevalent in my mind, as there were much worse incidents that happened. Downtown Vancouver, Canada. I worked the overnights at McDonald's. This guy, who was clearly very strung out, kept screaming at me because he wanted free food and almost looked like he was going to leap over the counter. As someone who is a female and only 5 feet tall, of course I was terrified and just trying not to further aggravate him. The worst part was that the manager knew this was happening, as well as the kitchen staff, as they could also hear it, and no one was really doing anything or even coming up front to even make it appear like I wasn't alone. Finally, after a few threats that he was going to stab me and telling me multiple times that I need to give him free food plus give him more drugs, the manager finally called the cops. Dude had FD off by the time they arrived. I was just super angry that it took them so long to even attempt to help me or take any form of action. I didn't work there for much longer and moved on to brighter days of a 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. life as a barista. This happened 5 years ago on my 21st birthday. I was working at family restaurant at the time on the evening of my birthday. I will preface the story by adding that around this time, there were several shootings that had happened over several months. Anyways, so it's about 1:30 a.m. and all of a sudden, an entire wall, along with its windows, explodes all across the inside of the restaurant. I screamed and ducked, literally fearing for my life, because I thought I was in the middle of a shootout on my goddamn 21st birthday. As it turns out, a car had blasted through the wall of windows, so my co-worker goes to run outside to see what the hell just went down. I call 911 and while I'm talking to dispatch, I go outside to see the damage for myself. My co-worker managed to get the unresponsive driver out of the destroyed car by the time I got there. Well, the person driving the car was our food delivery driver. He had left just moments before the accident to drive out his final delivery of the night, and coincidentally experienced his first seizure. Absolutely shit luck, right? Anywho, first responders come, take him away, and he is okay. I'll also note that, thankfully, no one else was hurt. We all stay until about 5 a.m. cleaning glass, car parts, and other shrapnel out of the restaurant. A birthday to remember. TLDR, car blasted through restaurant on my night shift. Turns out it was our delivery driver who just. I work overnight construction in NYC. The crazies and assholes really do come out at night. I've been assaulted on the job 3 times, had tomatoes thrown at me from high rises, screamed at constantly, and have had all sorts of weird encounters. One night, working on a water main break, an Indian guy, who spoke no English, came out of his house, carrying his 2 young kids under 4, and literally sat in our hole with them because he was upset by the noise. I guess he thought that would stop the work. Called the cops, cops screamed at him that he would be arrested if he didn't leave, yada yada. Most recently, we are working on a water main in a really shitty area. My supervisor hops in out mini dump to move it so we can drop the clean fill in the hole, when all of a sudden he screams and falls out of the truck. He had already put the truck in reverse, so it starts driving backwards and hits our other work truck. No damage, and no one got hurt, but it was scary. We run over to check on him and see a homeless guy, probably 60 years old with long, ghost white hair, sitting in the passenger seat of the truck. Everyone starts yelling at him to get out, and he just snaps and starts screaming like a wounded goat. Then he starts threatening to call the police on us. It was surreal. Never dull on night shift. I'm a paramedic working graveyard shift. One night, got called for a situation, unknown police on the way. There was a lady around 40, and she just arrived in the country. She was laying on the couch, eyes wide open, pupils fully dilated. There is almost no white in her eye. She's breathing normally, but she's not moving. At one point, she screamed and her body jerked in a way that no living thing should move. A friend of her was with her, and she was the one who called 911. Trying to figure what happened to the girl and asking basic medical question, her friend told me that she had been exorcised twice in Colombia before. At that point I was scared a little. Since she is not responding at all, we bring her to the hospital. All of her muscle was so hard that when we decided to take her to our stretcher, we were able to carry her like a plank in the stairs. She also tried to scratch my face with her nails, and once every 5 to 10 minutes screamed like something I had never seen before. She went to psych ward after. Never heard from her again. 15 years later I'm still wondering if it was a real demoniac possession, or just a psych condition. Came home after a later shift, around 1 or 2 a.m., stopped at the 24-hour Walton shop on the way home. I lived in the sticks, and no one was on that road, normally. I see headlights behind, coming up fast, but I was turning onto my gravel road anyway. Except that, they turned as well. They were a good 1/4 mile behind me, but no one rolls there except the neighbors anyway, so I thought it was a little weird. Turn into my driveway, park and head into the house. I can hear their tires on the gravel, but they are slowing down. That's when my dog started barking and I felt a tingle. I ran inside and I could hear them turning into my driveway. I had a 12 gauge in my bedroom, so I ran and got it and went back outside. Since the driveway was pretty long, I had time. They were just stopping behind my car when I opened the door, stepping into the light on my porch. It was a white Ford F-150 pickup. I heard one door open, and then it closed right away. They reversed out of my driveway, spraying gravel everywhere. I don't know if it was a joke by some kids or what, but I don't think they thought about me being prepared to confront them. From then on, being in the sticks, far from police help, I kept that gun near the door, just in case. Not mine, but a friend's. He worked graveyard at a Chevron station in San Jose. One night a guy comes up to the window, clearly on drugs, beat up to fuck too. Asks for gas on whatever pump, and puts some cash in the little push bin that goes through the bulletproof glass. My buddy pulls it through, looks at, covered in blood. Can barely tell what numbers are on the bills. He pushes it back, Tells the guy, dude, I'm not touching that. Both sides have a fucking shit fit about it. Buddy's not gonna touch his bloody money, drugged up dude is fucking livid. Pulls out a handgun to see if the glass is really bulletproof. Turns out it is. Guy turns around, back to his car, drives off. When he walks away, though, my buddy notices something fall out of his pocket. He waits a few minutes, nobody's coming up for it. My buddy goes out for a smoke, finds about $100 worth of crystal meth in bags just sitting on the ground. When I was 21 years old, I worked overnight at a really nice hotel downtown. I was a cute girl at the front desk, but surprisingly, I didn't have too many crazies hanging around. One night, I get a call on the front desk phone from an outside line. It was a friendly-sounding man who said that our human resources had hired him to interview the employees to test our judgment in certain situations. I was busy with paperwork, so I said sure, go ahead. He asked me some incredibly creepy questions, but I was young and dumb enough to miss the point completely. Him, if you had a man in your closet, what would you do with him? Me, I'd let him out. H, and what if he was tied up in your closet, what would you do then? Me, I'd let him out. Him, and what if he asked you to take your shoes off, what would you do? Me, I would try to balance them on his head. The whole time, he'd make sounds like he was writing down my answers. I told my managers in the morning that the guy interviewing me was weird. Have never seen a group of people more confused, creeped out and awkwardly stifling laughter. I worked in Research Park, third shift. My night started late, like 8 p.m. It was a normal quiet night, when early in my shift we were informed of a lockdown since we are in the University of Utah campus. We got text alerts and followed our protocol for these situations, closed blinds entirely, closed lab doors and locked and stayed low. It was unnerving. The sounds of sirens was apparent. The text alerts were of an active shooter on campus, which was terrifying to me. I am from CT. I still cry over the thought of Sandy Hook. It turns out the shooting was of the lovely Lauren McCluskey, murdered by her stalker ex-lying convict Tinder boyfriend, lied about his identity and age. How terrifying. The police failed her horribly. Really heartbreaking to learn that night on the other side of campus, and she lost her life. I work night shift at Amazon. Across the street from my warehouse is a motel that, according to my father, who's a police officer in the town I work, he also works a beat where my warehouse is basically a cracker whorehouse. He's there almost every day for something. He warned me not to go to the gas station that's next door, and to use one about a mile down the road. Well, my dumbass didn't grab gas on the day before, and my gas gauge was flashing at me when I got in my car at the end of my shift. My dumbass thought, I'll just go to the gas station across the street. What's the worst threat could happen? Well, let me tell you. Nothing. It was actually the day after that I found out that there was a severe stabbing in that gas station a few minutes after I left. Someone from my warehouse witnessed it. So I guess it's more of a close call than a horror story. Worked at a 24-hour Subway restaurant on the 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. You would think it wouldn't be too busy, but I was in a small ranching, logging and mining city. There was much else open after the bars let out except Denny's and Tim Hortons. Dealing with drunks is a pain. Especially dunks that would not ever leave that town and be forever chasing high school glory. But long weekend each summer the rodeo came to town. The population exploded. The fair popped up. A couple additional drinking spots, beer gardens opened up. We would be making between 100 to 150 sandwiches per hour from 10 p.m. through to 3 a.m. Most of the customers drunk off their faces and harassing the employees. There was usually a couple fights over the weekend. Every night had food on the floors, walls, and ceilings, including the wall behind the service area where people would have eaten subs at us as they left. Sandwich trays or drink cups filled with chew spit. Fucking disgusting. And this is without mentioning the bathrooms and the lot outside. Not worth the minimum wage plus 25 cents. I had night shift in a hotel with 10 floors. I worked at the reception. We had also rented out apartments. At night, the aunt of a 7-year-old boy and 9-year-old girl returned home. 10 minutes later, I received a call to call ambulance and police from the distressed aunt. They had found the dead mother of the kids at home on the 5th in the kitchen. She had been strangled and stabbed with a knife from her husband 90 times, it later was reported. That is how her kids did find her. The real unforgettable horror was later. I felt so helpless as I took the kids for a short time. They had pale frozen faces. I then went with them in the elevator to the 10th floor. The police had taken over a room there and had also a special care unit who took over the kids there. That elevator trip with both of them so emotionless, and me not able to do more than hold their hands. I still to this day hate that person who has done this to his kids. I worked overnights in an ER as a COVID screener. The 3 a.m. people that come in are always interesting because nobody coming into the ER at that time is there because of maybe they are there because they legitimately need an ER. One guy came in and his arm was completely slashed and it was spewing out blood with each heartbeat, and he was flailing it everywhere yelling something about BLM being bullshit. A black guy had apparently cut him, but he was high as a kite or something else like that going on, so IDK. So we were trying to get the guy to stop flailing his arm and the subsequent massive amounts of blood around while we got him a mask and had a nurse come out. I was lucky and didn't get anything on me, but my co-worker had to change into a spare set of scrubs in the ER because she got blood on her clothing and they had to wash the carpets 3 times to get the stains out. We were still having to screen people while this is all happening. I've also had someone walk into the main entrance next to the ER and tell me they were mid-suicide attempt, OD on pills, so I had to walk him over to the ER because he refused a wheelchair while he was slowly losing the ability to walk. I brought one with me just in case. But I was really screwed up for a few days after that one. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Like and subscribe for more videos like this one.